Madison's. Gary Madison works for the Farm Credit Council in Washington, D.C., which is the trade organization of the farm credit system. Farm Credit is a nationwide network of borrower-owned lending institutions providing credit for the nation's farmers and ranchers. As the Vice President for Young Beginning Small Farmer Programs and Outreach, Gary seeks to identify and meet the needs of the next generation of farmers and ranchers as part of Farm Credit's enduring mission of service to agriculture and rural America. Farm Credit provided some $7.7 billion to young farmers, $12 billion for beginning farmers, and $14.2 billion in financing for small farmers in 2008. Until recently, Gary was a small farmer operating a wholesale greenhouse business in New Hampshire, including raising cattle for the local freezer beef market. He holds bachelor's degrees in agronomy and biology from the University of Connecticut. And Tyler Madison is a credit representative with Farm Credit East, one of these farm credit institutions, the largest lender to agriculture in the Northeast. He has had articles published in industry publications like Grower Talks, Green Profit, and Progressive Forage. Tyler has also worked at the Boston Flower Exchange and on his family's greenhouse operation in rural New Hampshire. Gary, Tyler, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. This is Gary. I'll start off today, and I'd like to start out by saying that really the best risk management is common sense. It's what you do every day as a manager. It's an integral part of the business planning process, and it's a component of a business plan. To benefit from the farm business risk management process, you really need to understand your own version of success, which should include net profit. Your own definition of success, or your mission, is that baseline measure against which you're going to determine what you want to do on your farm, what your biggest risks are, and what is most important to you. It's important to put risk management in perspective relative to your concept of success. You're in the business of farming, and there's no avoiding risk, only mitigating or lessening the impact of the risks that you face. Being paranoid is not a risk management strategy. So let me give this presentation some context. I'll be defining success here to mean a financially profitable farm business that meets your family's needs. Success does not mean risk-free, or I own every kind of insurance known to man, or I have overcome my paranoia.
It's important that you keep both accounting and production records. You need to be able to measure the performance and manage the things that go wrong. Having a record of what you have done in the past is some of the best information you can get in order to plan for an uncertain future. Usually people associate farm risk management with somehow outsmarting the weather gods. If you want to play that game, you're going to lose. You can't wait for the perfect crop year to make money. You have to make money in the bad weather years in order to stay in business. Weather is going to happen. You have to accept that. And chances are you've already done some of the best weather risk management strategies out there, like irrigation, shade cloth, row covers, IPM, maybe crop insurance, depending on what you grow and where you are. From your records, you should be able to identify the largest costs of your business. Your knowledge of how your operation works is essential to being able to manage your biggest costs and how to manage the risks inherent in keeping that under control. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to be using the example of small-scale vegetable farming. What we're not going to talk about is specific programs or insurance products. That's something that's best left to an insurance agent in your area that understands your farm and your marketplace.
So if you're in a small-scale vegetable farming, it should be no surprise that labor is your biggest cost. The example shown here is very accurate labor expense accounting for growing heirloom tomatoes. You can see that all of the labor costs of growing amount to 76% of the annual cost of production. And that's not even counting the cost involved in selling the tomatoes, whether they may be at a farmer's market, a CSA, or a wholesale marketing channel. I hope you aspire to keeping accurate labor and task records like this, because that's how you'll be able to determine what crops are profitable for you to grow and which are not. The larger point here is that labor is likely your biggest cost in producing small-scale vegetables, and you've got to face up to the fact that it's worth paying attention to managing that high cost. Managing people is one of the hardest parts of being a farmer, and for most of us, it's not why we're farming in the first place. Every agricultural operation relies on people, and people bring risk. Not typically through evil intentions, but through the normal things that happen to normal people. Understanding this normal level of risk and planning for it when things are going right means that you'll be prepared when something normal goes wrong.
Let me give you an example of managing labor as your number 1 cost. When I talk to my customers, I ask them what would happen if they were disabled in some way, if they couldn't work. And most of them don't have an answer for me, usually because they haven't thought about it, because it hasn't happened to them. You may think that that's harsh, but when the owner-operator is a major part of the labor force, it really isn't a silly question. Labor is likely your biggest cost in labor, particularly the loss of your personal labor. As the manager and decision maker, can certainly be your biggest risk contributing to the failure of your business. You may have a plan in mind for your own farm operation, but really you want to write it down for a number of reasons. What if the person you're counting on to back you up is not available? What if you aren't available to explain the plan to the person who needs to execute it?
So here's a way to think about managing risk, a process you can use. Some of the best help I got in building my farm business was from the people I could count on to ask the best questions to really make me think about what I intended to do. And since I think those were such good questions, I put them into a chart with a place for you to write in some really important answers. So down the left side of this chart are the good questions, and across the top of the chart are the 5 key areas of risk management: people, financial, production, marketing, and legal. The idea is that this is a template to help you think. I don't know what the exact risks are on your farm, but I do know that they come in these 5 flavors. Don't get nervous. We'll be showing you some examples of how to fill this in shortly.
I'm sure you already know many of the risks that you face and you deal with as a normal part of your management of your farm business. But here are a few examples of knowing risks you face and some ways to mitigate them. Liability insurance isn't some magical solution for being careless or unsafe while you're running your operations, but it mitigates a big part of the risk when you do things right and something bad happens anyway. And you can't buy insurance for access to land. That's why many farmers have a mix of owned land and rented land. Rented land is much lower in cost, but the risk of access may be higher. And you should have insurance on your equipment, but that won't replace the time and money lost due to poor or irregular maintenance. Planned replacement of equipment or facilities should be a part of your long-term business plan. And here are a few more. Your exposure to these risks can be calculated with a simple exercise called a sensitivity analysis, or what-if analysis. The concept is pretty simple. If, for example, my input costs go up by 5%, what does that do to the bottom line? We see this on a regular basis with swings in oil price or corn prices if you're in the livestock business. Or if I get 7% less from my crop than I budgeted for, what does that do to my bottom line? Or if interest rates spike, what does that do to my ability to repay the debt, and what does that do to the bottom line? In order to do a meaningful sensitivity analysis, you have to have good, accurate records.
So let me go back to something that Tyler said. The loss of your own labor as a manager and decision maker can certainly be your biggest risk contributing to the failure of your business. The first thing you can do to manage the risk is to come up with a plan for who does what if you can't do it yourself. This is also known as an operational succession plan, an organizational chart, a labor utilization plan, or a depth chart.
So I'm not promoting this year's eventual World Series champions, but I'm just showing you the idea, how this idea works for a baseball team. A depth chart, or a chart, as it's pronounced up here in Boston, is a way of measuring job responsibility for a team. Your farm labor probably isn't organized this. You may have a center field, but if Jacoby Ellsbury breaks his ribs while he's in center field again, we know who's going to fill in for him. And then who's going to fill in for Victorino when he moves to center field, and who's going to fill in for Gomes when he moves from the DH position. You get the idea. From a farm business standpoint, your goal should be to plan for what happens if an employee calls in sick, or to plan what happens if an employee suffers a long-term disability. Starting with a simple organizational chart like the one shown, you can fill in employee names to produce multiple depth charts. To use the sports analogy, you have your starting lineup, and then you see what happens when you take somebody off the
So remember that idea of facing the risks you'd rather not? Well, we came up with a whole bunch of people risks where you'd need to have an organizational chart. Obviously, some of the worst are at the top, death or disability, having to fire somebody, just plain absence, the vacation, which is certainly elusive, or it was in my career, farming career anyway. Another one which is certainly realistic to be concerned about is maternity leave. Even something like a business expansion, that is, you think of it as a productive event, a good thing, or a special marketing event like having a pumpkin festival in the fall. If you don't understand what you've got for labor resources, you may find yourself either overstaffed or understaffed when you try to take on some new or different task. So if you take nothing else away from this webinar, spend some time writing down your answers to these scenarios on this page right here, on this slide, and then communicate them with your team. We wanted to provide you with a short example where facing the risks in your business comes into play using the one-page business and financial plan that we developed for a previous webinar, for which we created the model business we called Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. And Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes is a small tomato growing business where he sells generally direct to retail and grosses about $200,000 in sales a year and nets about $20,000. So in today's risk management example, we've got a disability situation. Tyler's broken his leg and he's going to be out for 12 weeks. And to simplify this, we've only filled out that one column of the people aspect of the risk management plan. So if you look down that first column, identifying the risks, disability of course, and it has the potential for a huge financial impact, and we'll discuss what that will be in a little more detail in a couple more slides. But have you looked at what's available? A succession plan or an organizational chart, same thing. Purchasing disability insurance, or even something as simple as performing a safety audit to try to forestall the injury in the first place. And then what is it that you're going to do about it? You've identified the risk. What are you going to do? Well, we'll show you in another slide or two how to use the one-page business plan to formalize what you're going to do, to write down what you're going to do, to think through what you're going to do if you run into a situation where you as the owner manager is disabled, or for that matter, any key employee that you have. And in the end, the results are all about staying in business. So is identifying the risk enough? What are you going to do about it? And do you have a plan? Well, I guess we have an app for that. Here it is. This one-page business plan hopefully is familiar to you because you attended our previous NGFN webinar. But I'm going to run through it so you can be a little bit more familiar with the details of Tyler's business. And I'll point out you can print out this blank form from the NGFN website, or you can, when this program today is archived, you can download the slides and get it from there. So let's look at the business plan, or a quick version of a business plan, a one-page business plan for the model business that we're talking about, Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. These objectives across the top are in different subject areas. It's the ones that we've already talked about. You'll see the first column refers to people problems. The second one refers to financial objectives. The third one refers to production objectives. And the final column, objective 4, refers to marketing issues. So without going too deeply into this, since we did it in another webinar, I'll just leave it at that this is, of course, not a complete business plan. This is a tool of how to think about your business in terms of the objectives and the goals and the actions you're going to take to accomplish those goals. So moving on to the budget and the historical performance of Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. Again, we're still talking about that particular example. This webinar that we have talked about, that we've done before on the one-page business plan, is available as a recording, and copies of these forms are on the NGFN website. But I'd point out that in broad detail on the chart on the lower left corner, we're talking about Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes selling $200,000 worth of tomatoes. It costs him $120,000 to grow those tomatoes, which leaves him a gross margin of $80,000. And from that $80,000, he has to subtract his overhead costs. Overhead costs are those costs which Tyler has to incur whether he grows 1 tomato or 10 tons of tomatoes. And subtracting out the overhead costs yields a net income. That's what Tyler gets to put in his pocket for all of his effort, of $20,000. So with that quick overview of the one-page business plan, let's go a little further with identifying how we're going to fit risk management into that.
So this is our scenario with some more details. Tyler broke his leg. It'll be out 12 weeks, and we have identified that the biggest impact of that is going to be that we need to replace his labor contribution to the company. We evaluated what tools to use and decided that we needed to employ a operation succession plan or depth chart, however you want to think of it, that some disability insurance to be purchased, and that we would perform a safety audit, or had already performed a safety audit, and we decided to use all of those tools, and we're gonna tell you how it worked. So this is what the risk management plan looked like before. You remember it, and then we came up with this organizational depth chart where Tyler's the owner operator, and who's gonna do what if stuff happens. Charlie is the key man employee. He's going to take over the majority of responsibilities. Sarah is going to help him with some stuff, and Charlie's cousins, who are seasonal employees, are going to step up and be asked to work some more hours than they normally would.
Well, here are the details of the Tyler's Tip Top Tomato example, a response plan for owner disability. And again, what we're showing you here is we're using the one-page business plan as a thought model, as a simple tool to be able to say, okay, how am I going to write this stuff down? I've identified I want to use the one-page business plan tool in terms of planning risk management strategies. So this slide and the 2 preceding ones are the 3 pages that I'd really like you to fill out for your farm business. If you fill out these 3 pages, you realize there's really a lot more detail that you could add, and you can go ahead and use several more one-page risk management and one-page business plans to help you think through what you need to do. The most important thing that you do is start, that you start writing things down about what it is that's going to happen if something bad happens. And let's take a look at this this plan. Going across the list of objectives, of course we want Charlie to take over management of the facilities and production, and Sarah is going to, that would be Mrs. Tyler, helps with invoicing and record keeping and management. Charlie's cousins, as Tyler said, are already going to help with the harvest. And we're going to implement a communication strategy. Something you might not have thought about is necessary in terms of how to respond to an owner disability. And looking down that objective 4 column, the first SMART goal is to set expectations for employees, vendors, neighbors, and customers. And I put neighbors in there because, well, because I was a farmer for 30 years, and I understand how important relationships with your neighbors and getting help from your neighbors is when something bad happens. This is not exactly a bad happening example, but at one point my wife and I were able to go off to a farm meeting that was going to take 5 days for the entire trip. And this was back when our 3 sons were rather young. We had cattle, we had chickens at the time. We had our crop of greenhouse cut flowers that we were harvesting, and to go away for 5 days, we had to plan what our neighbors were going to contribute, what our employees were going to be doing, get that all written down, leave written instructions for such complicated tasks as starting the generator that was driven by the PTO drive on the tractor. A lot of writing and planning had to happen for us to go away for just 5 days. And by the way, we left the kids at home with Grandma. We didn't bring them with us on that vacation. But the idea was that as far as planning, it took an immense amount of written planning because we couldn't be contacted by anybody. Once we went away, we had to leave written instructions because we really couldn't be there. And over the course of that 5-day, I guess I could call it a vacation, we had 14 different people swoop in and out of our house and greenhouses and barn doing all the things that we would normally be doing. So back to the slide at hand. Sorry for the divergence there, but back to the slide at hand, going down that Objective 4 column, setting expectations for the employees, vendors, neighbors, and customers is certainly part of it is just doing the human, the neighborly thing and saying what's wrong with Tyler and what's going to happen and how long he's going to be laid up. And then perhaps a little bit more detailed, when I went away for that trip, I alerted the repairman that would come and fix my equipment if I weren't around. And I let him know that if there was a problem, he was going to be first up to fix any of the equipment, which included our furnaces and heating system for the greenhouses. So basically, I gave my equipment guy my pager and said, if the alarm calls you, no matter what time it is, you need to get up and fix it. Thanks a lot, and of course I paid him for that, and we had a successful trip. But part of that planning is communications of who you need to tell what information and how you're going to leave that information available when you're not around. Tyler, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on calling a loan officer.
Yeah, sure. I do like to know how what the status of my customers are, and health can have a really big impact on your ability to repay your loans. And I know that seems obvious, but Farm Credit has a pretty tight relationship with its customers, and it's not like we would want you to say, well, just figure it out and pay the bills. We want to know how to help, and sometimes that help, usually that help is asked for too late, and then we're not able to do anything. But if you've got some open communication, then often we will be there to help you figure something out.
So just to reiterate, these 3 slides, the organizational chart and the original risk management plan to identify the problem that you're going to face, and then finally a response plan for this specific risk that you're facing are things that you can chart out in a very simple way using a very shorthand sort of tool like this one-page business plan. And again, you might want to fill out several of these. It's a great place to start. It's a way to build your input into a full-fledged business plan so that you can design and implement a more complete business plan, but do it one page at a time. Do it a little bit at a time, and obviously the most important thing is to start.
So I ran some numbers on how this would affect the year that this business is hoping to have, and some assumptions that I made were that the additional labor cost was going to be $84,000 for this 12-week period when Tyler's out, and that's not paying Charlie anymore or paying Sarah for their direct replacement of Tyler's time. It's paying the guys beneath Charlie who are going to need to work more than Charlie did because they're not as experienced, they're not as efficient, so it takes them more hours to do the same job. So filling in for Charlie rather than filling in for Tyler. And I also took into account the disability insurance payment of $400 a week while I'm on the couch, and I included that down in the draw and net profit line. So the other assumption that I made was that that for those 12 weeks that sales were going to suffer, because I'm not there to oversee quality control or to help, and I thought that would have a 2% or so difference. And the cost of goods, 100% of that change in cost of goods is the additional $8,400 of labor, but that represents a 5% increase in production costs, which gives you a significantly less gross margin than you thought you had before. And you can see that flowing all the way down to the net, the draw and net profit line, which is 30% less because of this injury, including the disability insurance payments, because of everything that happened. So could you? Yeah, there we go. So this injury cost the business almost $14,000 and Tyler $9,000, $9,100. And it's important to realize that just disability insurance doesn't solve this problem, nor would just having the depth chart have solved this problem. A safety audit might have prevented it from happening in the first place, but accidents happen on a farm. It could have happened anyway. The combination of these strategies is what kept us from being a real disaster. It could have been a lot worse. If there's no disability insurance, the net income line there would have been $16,000, which is about half of what the expected salary would be. And without the succession plan, I'm sure that the fewer tomatoes would have been harvested. It would have been, and the production numbers would have been even worse, maybe to the point of not making any profit at all. So.
And this is a real risk to a small business, whether it's Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, the business that we made up as an example for our one-page financial plan and one-page risk management plan, or whether it's the real business that we used to run, or your real business. It doesn't take much of a disability situation. You don't have to have a disaster in order to have a profound effect on your bottom line. And if you're thinking about the sustainability of your operation through years, hopefully this is giving you some incentive to consider doing this sort of planning for your own farm. But you have options. When you have problems, you want to be able to evaluate.
Over the course of your career as a farmer, this is an eventuality, right? In 30 years of farming, you're going to have a 3-month absence for some reason. It's unlikely that you'll work for 30 or so years without that kind of absence.
So evaluating options is hopefully what you are able to do when you recognize that you have problems. And the choices that you can easily put a dollar value on are typically the expensive options that you don't want to use, but you may have to. As a farm business manager, you're already thinking about the things that may put you out of business. You're planning for those big risks. But don't forget to plan for navigating the time when your business is struggling. You may have to cut back on capital expenses, meaning that that replacing the rototiller, replacing the tractor, buying the piece of land next door even, you won't be able to do that. That should go off the table immediately if you start having a risk-induced struggle in the business if you're under stress. If you are a borrower, having conversations with a loan officer about, so what happens if I do have a crisis, is an important thing to do. It's not a if you're not a borrower, it doesn't mean you don't have to worry about that. It means that you should be prepared to understand how much more you can borrow or invest in your business and still be able to pay that off, because you are looking at the possibility of you're trying to be prepared for the possibility of risks that you may not have fully identified, but you know might lead to long-term disability for the owner-operator. And again, to emphasize the communication aspect of it, you do need to protect the markets that you have. You do need to make sure that you, even if your production does decrease, you're still a force in the marketplace. You're still maintaining the demand for the product that you're growing, even if it's not going to be able to be replaced until next year. If you do happen to have, let's say, a CSA type operation, and in a crop failure situation, you purchase in replacement crop and then resell it, it would be an important part of a risk management plan to know not only where would you buy it, but how much you'd have to pay for it and what you would have to sell it for in order to be able to predict what your margin will be, so you know if it's profitable for you to do that or not. The incidence of having to reduce the amount of help you have in the event of a production crisis, or in the event of just a weather-related production disaster, who goes first? How many people fewer do you need? If you have an organizational chart, it doesn't mean you start at the bottom and weed your way up, firing people. It means you look at the jobs, at the tasks that those people do, and you're able to perhaps consolidate and split some hours so that you maintain that connection with your labor force that's already trained. And in a true disaster, what is it that you want to sell first? You know, the new pickup truck you just got? Well, maybe that's not the right thing to sell. Maybe you don't need that much money, and maybe it's the used tractor, the one that you've just replaced, that you're hanging around for a spare. But having an idea of what your assets are worth and at what point you would need to sell them is prudent planning. So there are lots of risk management solutions out there. And I want to leave you with a final caution about having a misplaced reliance on having insurance to make you whole. Insurance is absolutely necessary, but it's designed to mitigate a loss, not win you a jackpot. Whether it is crop insurance or fire insurance or auto or life insurance, you really can't name a kind of insurance that you want to use. And if a risk becomes a potential loss, you should have already decided what your options are for mitigating it. You'll notice that borrow money from Farm Credit is not on this list, but it could be. The best manager looks to use other options first, because using credit to pave over a bad production year only means that you have to increase profitability in future years to pay off that debt. It can really be a never-ending downward spiral if you're using intermediate or long-term debt to cover your short-term losses. So risk management tends not to be a really direct, here's a problem, here's a solution sort of thing. Multiple solutions are often the best. They're often the best way to think about mitigating risk. And you're probably doing quite a bit of that already. And the best solutions, like the safety audit, aren't expensive, but are based on common sense. So with that, Jeff, let's take some questions.
Excellent. All right. I'm going to start with a question from Melanie. I'm going to paraphrase. She is essentially saying, you guys have your head in the clouds. No farmer is going to sit down and make all these plans. So Can you comment as to the realism of actually working on these plans?
Sure. Tyler, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Usually this topic comes up with business planning, right? It's that most farmers don't think that they need a business plan either. And I strongly disagree. And I think that in most cases, they've already composed it. It's in their head, but they're not going to write it down. And it's not so much a failure to not have a plan, whether it's a business plan or a risk management plan or a marketing plan. It's a failure for them to communicate it. And you know, I don't know. I get more done when I write it down, when I make it into a list. I think that that's true of everybody. But I think the other thing that I think, Melanie, that you're getting at that's probably very accurate is that most of the farmers that I work with are too busy being busy and not spending the time to be strategic about their businesses. And I think that this is exactly the kind of component that those folks lack. That this is the sort of thing that helps them be big picture thinkers and to ensure that they have success, business success, year in, year out.
And I'd add on to that, Melanie. You know, we are definitely here telling you to eat your spinach. You know, this is good for you, and just like you may have done at the dinner table, found a way to hide it in your napkin or do something else with that spinach that your mom thought you were eating. It doesn't do you any good to not eat it. I think that the easiest thing for an owner operator of a farm, and I guess I'm just telling you personal experience here, is to figure, well, it doesn't apply to me. I don't really need that business plan. I don't really need to do to write out the instructions on how to start the PTO-driven generator for electricity when I go away, because somebody will come who knows how to do it. There's all sorts of things you can do to tell yourself it's not really that important until it is really important. And I think that successful farm businesses are the ones that recognize what's important and address those potential pitfalls in a way such that they can accommodate a lot of stress in the business and still be able to survive and even thrive in spite of it. You know, I chainsawed a lot on our farm, right? We heated with wood, at least in the house, and I've got several pairs of jeans that I keep as a reminder where the chainsaw went through my pants, and it took a couple of pairs of pants to really drive home the idea in my mind I needed to get some Kevlar chaps. Sometimes it takes us a little while to realize how important managing risk is, but I can tell you I feel a lot better about chainsawing, well, the chainsawing now or after I got those chaps, because I realized I was doing something pretty low cost but pretty effective as far as keeping my legs underneath me so I could continue to walk around and feed the cows and pick the flowers.
Mm-hmm. And Catherine O'Donnell says, I'm a farmer and I'm ready and excited to make these plans. So there you go. Would you say this is more like an off-season sit down and make these plans, or it's really throughout the year?
Sure. I do think it's something that you'd end up spending more time on in the off season. Just like you know, when you have your staff meeting on Martin Luther King Day when nobody's busy doing anything. So it's yes, but at the same time, you're going to recognize risks that you have during the course of the year, especially if you change a production technique of some kind and you realize that what you're doing has a different risk than what you did before. It'll come up all the time. Once you start thinking about it, you won't be able to get away from it. and you won't feel better till you write it down.
And that's one of those things that I say when I talk about the one-page business plan is keep a blank copy in the glove compartment of the farm pickup truck, so that when you have one of those good ideas in your busy production season, you can jot it down, and then in the slow season, you can pull out that pile of crunched up and dirty and oil-soaked and dusty one-page business plans from the glove compartment of the truck, and you've got a reminder right in front of you of what are those things I really wanted to address. So absolutely yes, this is better thought through in the off season when you have time to do it, but you want to make sure that you have a method in your own way to record the things that you want to think about, record the risks that you want to address while you're in the height of your season.
Great point. Diane writes, thinking about labor and the small acreage farm, most small farmers are family operations without employees. How do we go about risk strategies to mitigate when we don't actually hire any off-farm labor?
Well, we had 3 sons, and I'm glad they all survived our farm experience. Maybe I don't understand the question exactly. We farmed with part-time hired labor, off-farm labor, until our kids were old enough to help us, and then they were our primary labor force for quite a few years as they were growing up. And that's a normal progression of a farm business, but again, that's something that you have to plan for. Even if it's your kids and they're your labor force and it's family, when is it that your kids are going to be able to participate? What's the right thing for you to do as far as letting them handle the rototiller or learn how to drive the tractor or whatever the other skills are that they're going to need, and then how are you going to replace them? They're always going to know more than anybody you hire. It's their farm. Hopefully they've got a lot of buy-in, and they're more attentive to all those needs, and replacing 3 of your own children may take 4 or 5 hired labor.
Mm-hmm. Tyler, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I think you have to be careful too about I don't know what you're using as a definition of small either. USDA's definition is I think up to $250,000 of gross income, which I suppose you could, if you had a big family, you could probably be all the farm labor involved there. But you're only one kid going to college away from needing to hire somebody at that point. And maybe it's much smaller and not applicable, but your kids working on your farm, or your cousins, or your grandfather, all those people carry risks too, and they're without a doubt an important part of your operation. And just because you don't pay them doesn't mean that they don't have risks, because you rely on those people.
Your business has a risk by relying on those people, because you still have to plan. So what happens if they can't do it, even if they're free?
Right.
Great. Lee says, I'm thinking about the young beginning farmers I know who are bullish on energy and bearish on cash. For these folks, they'll put the sweat equity in to prepare a risk management plan as long as they have the proper tools like the ones we presented. But then there's mitigation through insurance, which costs money up front. So his question is, what are the most non-negotiable types of insurance that should be bought in your opinion?
Sure. That's a case-by-case sort of thing. But I'll answer each of those with a mostly sort of answers. Almost every operation should have liability insurance. Even if you're doing things right, you need to be protected if something goes wrong. You can't afford to lose your whole farm because somebody thinks that you put glass in your tomatoes and they want to sue you for it. We live in an extremely litigious society. You need to protect yourself from that aspect of our society. But as I said in the presentation, that doesn't excuse you from doing things the right way in the first place. There are, I mean, you can go through the list and see which ones of those you can really afford to do without. I know that, I mean, even with this compelling example, you know, we didn't have health insurance or disability insurance growing up for a long time. But a trip to the hospital because Dad cut his leg with a chainsaw could have meant a really big impact to our farm. But he had a good relationship with his bank
and his doctor. And I just want to I want to correct that, Tyler. We did have health insurance, but I did not have disability insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just because we didn't take you to the doctor didn't mean we didn't want you to, you know, didn't mean we couldn't pay for it.
I've got the scars to prove it, man.
Yeah, right. If it's not bleeding, it doesn't hurt, right?
Just a point of clarification. When you talk about liability insurance, Tyler, are you talking about product liability insurance or general liability insurance, like someone trips on your land?
Mostly general liability insurance.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure there's somebody on this call who's thinking about selling raw milk. If that is the product in the agricultural world that you absolutely have to get product liability insurance on, and good luck with that. It's a lot riskier. It's a risky product to sell, but the people who want it really like it. They're willing to take on the risk. That's fine, but the actuaries don't love the math. So that's one the product liability insurance to have. Most other product liability will come under a general liability sort of policy if you're selling like as an ag retailer. Normally that sort of thing is covered. But general liability is mostly what we're talking about.
Yeah, it would be you can get product liability frequently as a rider on your general property and casualty insurance. That would be the house fire, that kind of thing that you need to have. You can add degrees of liability, and one of the important things to note about it is if you're inviting people onto your property to buy your stuff, to pick up your stuff, you're in a different arena of liability because your responsibilities are greater than just somebody passing by your farm and tripping and falling. When you invite people onto your farm in a commercial environment, that's a greater risk for liability.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it's very important to be clear with your insurer if you're getting product liability or not as part of your general.
Yep.
Yes, and to be clear with your insurer if you are engaging in commerce on your property. You don't want to be in a situation where you think you have insurance and your insurer does not because you're doing some activity that voids your coverage, like having a retail operation. You need to be very clear with your insurer what you're doing.
Or delivering your CSA share in your personally insured Subaru.
Yeah.
They don't like that.
Huh. And agritourism is probably another red flag or danger.
Yeah. Sure. Anybody with a trebuchet to throw pumpkins around, they should have insurance.
It's not just those who might get hit with the pumpkin; it's those operating the big, huge slingshot.
Right. The last thing you want to do is launch an employee.
Our employees go far. Catherine is asking, where and how do I get a safety audit, and what is the process like? If I do, but I'm not able to change things before applying for insurance, will I still be able to get coverage before addressing?
Sure. A safety audit isn't a formal thing. you can, the way you get one is you ask somebody to help you identify risks. Usually we're talking about equipment or facilities here. So who are the people that would normally do that? You can ask a building inspector. Sometimes that's a double-edged sword, because they'll tell you what needs to be changed to meet with code, or that you must change it in order to comply with code, that sort of thing. Sometimes that can be very expensive. And other times it's just asking somebody who's been there before. This is a great time to reach out to neighbors or peers and say, hey, or your equipment repair guy would probably be the first person I'd ask. Say, how do I mitigate some of these risks? What do you see that I'm doing wrong or that could be safer? And it might be as easy as, well, your tractor needs a rollover bar, and it just so happens there's a grant to cover that kind of thing. Talk to these people to get it. At least New Hampshire had one of those about 2 years ago. So it's not a formal thing that you're going to pass or fail. It's not like a visit from the health inspector, and it doesn't necessarily impact your ability to be insured.
I did that sort of thing on our farm with our insurance agent. His interest, of course, was to sell me more insurance, but still he did a walk around with me, and we talked about how this was good or that could be better, or installing GF ground fault interrupter plugs near water. And doesn't mean that you're not going to get insured at all. Really, in the eyes of someone who's trying to sell you insurance, your willingness to take some direction as far as how can I be safer is the kind of thing that they'd want to hear.
Yeah.
And just to be clear,
they might be able to sell you less insurance if you do those things too.
Right. Just to be clear, this is a different topic than food safety certification, like good agricultural practices sort of thing.
Yeah.
So very different. Cheryl asks for some wisdom about seeing through the salesman in your insurance agent. How do you know? How do you know what's really important? They have a vested interest. So how do you decide?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's harder to do, but getting competing insurance companies to look at what you've got and tell you what they think you need for insurance. It does come down to assessing your capacity to bear the risk without the insurance. And this is, I guess we were trying to get at this when we mentioned that there's this insurance paranoia that you can develop that, gosh, I need to have insurance for everything and that's going to solve the problem. Well, you can't just like I did not buy disability insurance. I had developed other sources of income that I hoped would replace that, but it was not something that I ended up buying however much I should have. You end up making choices, and if you don't have a loss, then you could say it was the right choice. But if you do have a loss, that's the time that you always say, gosh, I wished I'd bought that insurance. It's a balance of what you can afford, and asking that insurance agent when he comes to sell you something, asking him what's typical, what do most people do, use them as your expert. To a lesser degree, somebody who's a cooperative extension agent may be familiar with having purchased insurance, and Tyler's comment earlier about asking your neighbors what they've got for insurance and who they buy it from, and their experience is probably a pretty good exercise.
Well, one other little question, which you all may or may not know. Barry asks if there are any insurance companies that cover hydroponic growers.
For what? For the crop or the equipment?
Um,
I don't know. Barry.
Well, let's
Barry. We'll examine both of those things. So hoop houses are very, very difficult to get insured. So if you're growing hydroponics in a greenhouse like most people do, then that itself is a challenge. A gutter connect greenhouse is usually seen more as a fixture and a little bit easier to get insured. The equipment itself inside the greenhouse would be insured under our normal equipment policy, though the risk of it failing or breaking or doing something wrong is pretty minimal. I don't see any real difficulty there. The crop itself, most greenhouse crops are not insurable except when they go with the building. So in order for your crop to be insurable, the greenhouse has to collapse, basically.
Well,
and
to burn, because remembering back to the insurance that I bought on the greenhouses, I did not buy collapse insurance. That was not a covered peril. That's in the jargon of insurance. You insure a crop or a structure or a thing for a particular peril. So if the greenhouse service building caught on fire and that consumed the crop that was in the greenhouse, then the crop would be covered. But if the greenhouse collapsed because the heat was off, because I didn't fix the oil burner, then the crop nor the greenhouse was covered. So there's a lot of moving parts that greenhouses are a high-risk structure. And you can, as Tyler said, insuring the crop is very difficult, if not impossible, frequently, well, not impossible, impracticable. The cost of the insurance is often not worth the mitigation that you can accomplish by having duplicate water systems, duplicate wells, duplicate electrical cooling or heating systems, which is how most greenhouse growers would approach the issue of assuring, not insuring, assuring that they can produce a crop.
And if you look at capital improvements to mitigate risk, if you do end up selling the farm, that's something that adds value to your farm. It adds to the sale price, whereas buying insurance does not.
Yep.
Yes, being able to evaluate something that you buy, like the difference between buying an irrigation system or buying crop insurance for the same crop. Nobody ever made a dime with crop insurance. All the insurance does is replace a loss, but what irrigation might be able to do is actually increase your yield. So there would be a normal predisposition to buy irrigation and not buy the crop insurance, because you're effectively spending your money on something that's going to increase your yield and cover a great deal of the risk that you face for loss by drought.
And that applies to a whole bunch of other capital type improvements that would improve your yields. Bird netting. If you're a small fruit grower, normally people are talking about a 100% improvement in their crop because of that. But it's also a risk management tool. So, the shade cloth, or I've seen a lot of tomato and heard of a lot of cherry growers who are using greenhouses to cover their crops so that they don't get too much water, and they can increase their yield because they're cutting down on their splits.
Right.
So, yeah.
These are great points. Jack asks, is crop insurance at all practical on a small diversified vegetable farm where you have 50 to 60 different crops with a half an acre or less of most crops?
And if you're selling retail, the answer is probably not. The only upside to it, and I had a farmer who called this USDA blood money at one point, which I think is overly dramatic, but if the only upside to it is that you need that cat coverage in order to get any kind of disaster payments, which you would be eligible for.
I guess I think the right answer is to be very skeptical and cost conscious when trying to buy crop insurance. Depending on what part of the country you're in, their products may or may not be available. And for a diversified farm, as you described, that's a very difficult thing to insure other than through the adjusted gross revenue type of insurance, AGR, or AGR Light, which is primarily available only in the northeast part of the country. Yep. So it's not only are you faced with a couple of guys here on the webinar telling you really pencil out your insurance costs, but you may not even be able to buy the best product because you're in a different part of the country.
Yep. And that's not that your local crop insurance agent can't get you that insurance, but it ends up being a lot of work for them, and there's got to be enough demand in your county to make it worthwhile. So you're probably better off looking at other risk management strategies first. But if you think that that's the right one and you do the homework on it, then you should get it.
Okay, well, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Tyler. I want to let you know that you can download these one-page plans on the website archive page on ngfn.org. And we are recording this webinar. It will be archived on that same page. I've sent it out in the messages, but you will also get an email link right to the archive page. And there are 40+ other webinars we've done in the past, including the one-page business plan and one-page financial plan webinar, also linked to, by the way, from the one-page risk management plan webinar page. And take some professional development time and dig through these archives. I would imagine you'll find something quite, or another thing quite interesting to you. We will have this up within a few business days. Our webinars are organized into topics, so dig through whatever interests you there. We do offer our webinars every third Thursday of the month, although this is the fourth Thursday if anyone's paying attention still after an hour and a half. We have our sign-up links on ngfn.org/webinars. The next webinar is April 18th, the third Thursday. Lauren Gwynn, a national expert on meat processing, will present with case studies some innovative meat processing models from across the country. At the national level, we've heard many times that meat processing is a bottleneck for regional protein. Lauren has some really interesting insights into this, and you don't want to miss it. And though we don't have an ironclad date yet, I do want to let you know about another webinar, likely in late April. Rural Development will talk about two programs that are excellent for local and regional food systems work. There's great agency desire for more applicants to this program. One is a grant program, and one is a loan program for which for-profits are eligible, so that's particularly interesting for some. And this is all for local and regional food work. You can let us know in the post-webinar survey if you'd like to be automatically registered for either or both of these webinars. I want to let you know about 3 of our Wallace Center websites. Foodhub.info is a food hub of information, research, case studies, a map of many of the food hubs across the country. The NGFN Food Hub Collaboration recently chose 9 food hubs across the country to work closely with and document their stories. Read about our study hubs on the site. There are even links to TA providers with experience in aggregation and distribution. The NGFN Food Hub Collaboration is building a community of practice of food hub managers and staff, and also food hub supporters. We have a newsletter about every other month, TA and networking opportunities, and more. This is another thing that you can sign up for in the post-webinar survey. Just let us know if you'd like some more information. HughFed.org is our site for the Healthy Urban Food Enterprise Development Center run by the Wallace Center. This program and website is focused on increasing access to food to underserved communities using market-based solutions. On the site, you'll see the descriptions of our 30 grantees, the description of the initiative, photos, and a library of some of the best food access resources. If you have a resource you'd like to share, please let us know. Contact at ngfn.org. And foodshedguide.org is our site for producers wanting to adapt to the changing food business landscape. We have instructive text, case studies with an emphasis on how to have a viable business in a food value chain. Learn about, for instance, factors to consider when deciding on legal status. Foodshedguide.org also has the one-page plans. This is a collaboration with Farm Credit. You can find the NGFN on YouTube, on Twitter, and on our website, ngfn.org. The Wallace Center is now also on Facebook. Come like us. Search for Wallace Center at Winrock International. And again, if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage, or just let us know in the post-webinar survey. We'll sign you right up. Contact us at any time. contact@ngfn.org. The NGFN would like to thank you again for your time today. Let me encourage you once again to fill out the survey that will open your web browser in just a moment. And thank you again. This concludes the webinar.